So I'm not really sure I'm going to be speaking for my allotted 30 minutes period. Look at all of this. But it's just Braille. Braille is big. So don't be worried. Be prepared to ask many questions. And even then, I'm not even sure I have all the answers. So if at the end of this session, you ask yourself, well, why is such a dynamic organization as Sunbeams? Why could they have chosen me as its chair? Well, don't worry. You're not alone. I'm always asking myself the same question. Now, I think it's an incredible opportunity for me to be chair, but also to speak to you this morning, especially on the cost of living crisis, which I don't know anything about. But it's something we've never faced before in prosperous Britain, have we? You know, we look at the rest of the world, like Nigeria, where I come from, and we wonder how they manage with all the limited resources and all that. And we're in prosperous Britain, and now we have a cost of living crisis. But I'll start by telling you a story. So one day, Michael and Annie came to visit me in my shabby house in Lancaster there. You know, they didn't even know my address then. Oh, I was going to say, I've been trustee of many things, but I'll go back to that. They didn't even know my address then. But after all the niceties, they asked if I would be a trustee of Annie Mawson's Sunbeams Music Trust. Now, it sounded like something they'd just been discussing on the way, you know, to Lancaster. You know, it's like, oh, while we're in Lancaster, let's talk to him and see. He might be interested. You know, I had never been asked to be a trustee. So I didn't know what to expect. For what I know now, there would have been a meeting at which my name would have been put up for discussion. You know, my skills would have been assessed. You know, what I bring to the board, they'd mull over all that. And I wouldn't even be there to defend myself. Then someone would make a decision and say, tell Annie and Michael to talk to Ife. Because since then I've been on many other boards, the Overseas Fellowship of Nigerian Christians, even my church. And this is what I've noticed. And I think we've also had a few other trustees in Sunbeam. So now I know the process a bit better. And now I know that they didn't just dream of it somewhere around Kendall, because I hear someone say Kendall is the best place in the world. So it wasn't in Kendall. It was a few weeks before they talked about it, and for some reason, and I really don't know why, they said yes. So I'd met Annie. I heard a bit about Sunbeams. I'd met Annie in 1992, about the time that school was closing. I didn't even know then. And I'd liked what I'd heard anyway. So I thought, well, if it's just a matter of attending a few meetings a year, you know, I'm sure I can manage it. I'll try and be the best trustee I could possibly be. But that was about 20 years ago. It was actually a very gentle introduction, you know. I didn't realize I had been so immersed into Sunbeams until I was asked to be vice chair. Me? Vice chair? Well, what were they thinking about? Well, at least I'm not the chair. And then in February 2020, as we've discovered, I was asked to be chair. Oh no. Now, as most people already know, and they didn't know this then, this was COVID time. It was actually the last face-to-face meeting for a while, and we didn't know that. For some reason, and I still don't know why, I'm still chair. Which is one reason I believe that Sunbeams Trust is the most dynamic charity in the whole wide world. But for each person running a charity or project, I'd expect you to probably say the same about yours. But I'm saying it about Sunbeams. Because if you don't, you probably don't have the motivation or enthusiasm. I love that word, enthusiasm. You have to roll your mouth around it. Enthusiasm. I have jokes about it even. Did you know? I once got really embarrassed, but I'll tell you that later on. So many of us carry on our tasks with the enthusiasm. Enthusiasm. Despite the financial shortfalls. You know, despite the much talked about cost of living, my voice is going down again. Despite the much talked about cost of living crisis, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, because our motivation is bigger than our difficulties. So I said Annie and Michael introduced me gently to Sunbeams. But very soon, I was singing as loftily, cheering as loud as anyone else. Sunbeams does that to you. But that's not all that makes us a dynamic charity. Now, at this point, you're probably expecting me to tell you what dynamism means in the Oxford Dictionary or Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know. But when I think of dynamism, I think of its origin, and it's probably the same as the word dynamite. I think the word is Greek or something, dunamis. So dunamis is the same word where you get dynamite and dynamism. So, what's dynamite? It's an explosive substance. And so is dynamism. It's disruptive, it's transformational, but it's simply fabulous. So when an engineer, explosive engineer, plans a detonation, he or she would kind of think, right, where's the space in which this explosion will take place? It has to be inclusive of its space. It's an inclusive process. So in the same way, dynamism has to be inclusive of its environment when transforming it. It is never in a vacuum. We are dynamic because we change our environment. So in making me trustee and then chair, Sunbeams integrated a disabled person from a minority group into Cumbria. Now let's just stop and think about this for a bit. This is not multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan London. In fact, they had to export me from Lancaster. But this is where we work, among the elderly, among persons with disabilities, among the vulnerable. Do you know that according to international figures, about 15% of the population of any country is made up of persons with disabilities? So, if we look at it, at least 1 in 7 trustees should have a disability. I don't know the maths, I didn't do science that well. And I'm talking about explosive engineering. But in one stroke, Sunbeams has become that representative of the society we live in, just in that one stroke. But however, if I was just there to make up the numbers to fill that stroke, would I have also become chair? But what if we said that 1 in every 7 charities should be chaired by a person with a disability? How would that work? That would be a dynamic, transformational response in the light of the statistical trends I've just quoted. It would also mean representation and participation for an often neglected and unheard segment of our society. Now, I believe that in order to be truly dynamic, our work must be inclusive of those you wouldn't normally include. It must be different. It must be innovative. It must be life-changing. That's why when Annie spoke about the people whose lives were changed, you saw a dynamic organization. This does not mean that dynamism is not without its difficulties. Some transformational measures can be implemented swiftly, others not so. After all, the same environment which we should consider is beset with the cost of living crisis. So when I became chair, the very first question was how to get all my material for the meetings accessible. How would I read the agenda? Because you've got to go. The next item on the agenda is there was no grant to buy the braille embosser we needed. And it wasn't cheap. But we got it all the same. And that's why I'm able to speak to you from notes. Because we got it. I'm glad, I really am, that all dynamic organizations have to make these kinds of, don't drop. Don't drop. Have to make these kinds of priorities, have to consider situations, have to decide on what's best, have to look. And I'm also glad that one of Sunbeam's priorities was to include the board, staff, and users. Here is one of its advantages. Now, I have since found out that there are government grants to offset the cost of living crisis. Do you know? Right. Heating has gone up. How do we pay? Our budgets are more stretched. How do we meet the competing needs? Even our donors may have less to give because they too are struggling with several needs. Everything is just so expensive these days. But grants don't provide for everything, as we found out during the application to make me work normally despite being blind. Surprisingly, funding is not the most important consideration. It is more motivation, the raison d'etre of the organization, that is most important. This will vary from one charity to the next, but there is a concern though that funding organizations are applying a uniform set of criteria for diversity. Sometimes we cannot meet the criteria, not because we are not dynamic, but because we don't fit. Like Sunbeams, we do things different. We appoint a black blind man as chair against the grain. It has its advantages. It doesn't always slow down our funding. But some other things do. Sometimes organizations have to make those difficult choices between dynamism and receiving funding. Now, for all those who run charities and projects, we all know that dynamism is in the motivation and character, but it is also in the process. Many of the steps that demonstrate dynamism have to be planned well and executed with a clear understanding of the dynamics within which the organization operates. Do you know? We all say though that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this reminds me of a passage I once read in the Bible. So Jesus was talking to his people then, and he said, you know, nobody plans to build a tower without counting the cost. You must count the cost, because if you do that, if you don't, you might just stop building halfway. And then people would say, oh, you started this project and you couldn't even complete it. We have a great building which we completed. And we're all sitting in it now. See how beautiful. See how award-winning. But there was a time when this building was just in the design stage. Don't fall off, don't fall off. Do you know, we saw the building. We knew its advantages, but there was no structure except a model. And I remember at the meeting, you know, someone showed me this wooden thing and said, this is what Sunbeams would look like. That was several years ago. So as Annie said, we commissioned this award-winning architect. We shared the vision with him. He got it. He got the vision. And then we needed to find the funds. But the vision came before the funds. Some of the specifications were difficult. Some of the materials were not easily obtained. It was, in every sense of the word, a long-term project. But I'm going to ask a few questions. How would it have been affected by the cost of living crisis? For example, what if funders thought it was unaffordable? What if some of our vision did not tally with those of our funders? I know that funders always say they want to work with us, charities and organizations. But I also saw a reference in one of the other charities I was working with to this NPO thing. And I was really interested. So I read the document because it came out in Braille. And it says that one of the things it says, most organizations are expected to be low risk. But sometimes they're actually high risk. It didn't say though how to determine when an organization becomes high risk, or when the risk becomes unacceptable. But we as organizations have to have the vision, whether it's acceptable, high risk, low risk. And whether an organization is high risk or not. An NPO will have this caseworker, and I've been at a meeting where someone from the Arts Council was there attending the meetings to understand what's happening. to give us guidance. So I'll go back to my explosive analogy again. Can you imagine an explosives engineer and he's mixing the dynamite and the accountant is going, haven't you got too much dynamite in that? Are you sure that's the right mix? Are you sure we can afford that much explosive? Because when you walk around this building later, remember what drove us, what won the architectural award, what makes this building so impressive was the vision to create something dynamic. Everything, including the funding, had to follow the vision. We got it right this time, but we don't always. We didn't find the funding to support the braille embosser that's producing these notes. But we had the vision to purchase it. And I'm grateful we did. You see, our innate dynamism is not affected by the cost of living crisis. It's in our character. However, the crisis is a frustration we have to deal with. It affects our planning. Don't fall. Those notes were, see, it means we have to adapt. It means that we have to be creative in our funding applications. And so much more. But a dynamic organization will always be a dynamic organization. We are well aware of the crisis. It comes up in every discussion, in different guises. We have these meetings and we talk about, this, that. In the end, it boils down to the cost of living crisis. But however, we soldier on because we have a vision. That is what I urge on everyone gathered here. The vision. The vision. Your vision. Now, I believe this vision is in the British psyche. Don't worry about it. It is demonstrated over centuries of explorations and inventions, even of dynamite. See, I come from a country that didn't have steamers to sail the Atlantic. We didn't go to America. The country I come from didn't have the creativity to make explosives. And it shows in the standard of living and in other indices. So, what I'm going to leave with you, you all think I've got all the answers, don't you? Right, this is what to do. This is how to do. I've only got one answer. Keep the vision, because it's permanent and the cost of living crisis is temporary. Thank you very much.